Yes, sir, we are live now.
Okay.
Greetings to all of you present here. I, Architect Tara Singla, with my colleague, Architect Rajendra Kumar, our head of school, Dr. Architect Atul Singla, all faculties and students of lovely School of Architecture and Design, LSAD, LPU, welcome all of you to this insightful session today. Today, we have live audiences, not only from our university, but also from many other architecture schools of India. Since we are having a very huge and inquisitive audience for this session, I shall advise all of you to please write your questions in the chat box. We shall be discussing them after the main presentation during the Q&A session. The eTalk series by LPU attempts to bring iconic names in the field of architecture on a single platform to discuss their experiences in this wonderful field. In our previous session, we had architect Massimiliano Fuxas from Rome, Italy, and architect Sanjay Puri from Mumbai, India. We at LPU truly believe that a good student has an innate potential to become a great leader, the one who can solely be a harbinger of great transformation. In line with that thought, we have an ardent learner and a great leader with us today. We have with us a distinguished personality, a legend who has closely observed, learned, and imbibed the teachings of his father, also a great architect. He has revolutionized the way we see, understand, and interpret the field of architecture, especially with regard to education, research, and writing. We have with us a truly inspiring individual, the legend himself, architect Dr. Vikramaditya Prakash, son of great modernist architect, architect Aditya Prakash at LPU today. Before I request our Senior Dean and HOS LSAD, Dr. Architect Atul Singla, for a formal introduction to our lovely presenter, I would like to say a few words about him. Dr. Atul Singla is a Senior Dean, Chief Architect at LPU. He's also the founder architect of Idea Architects and Designers. He's an alumnus of the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and the Architectural Association, London. He holds a PhD in Architecture, Spatial Planning from SPN New Delhi. His professional projects with the British firm Calford Seddon, UK, include the largest Gurdwara of London, Tata Coventry, British, and many other residential, religious, and healthcare projects. In his role as the chief architect of LPU for the past 2 decades, he has designed our beautiful LPU campus in Punjab, one of the largest in India. His projects at Idea Architects center on his core design philosophy of sustainability, functional planning, and his love for biophilia. Architect Atul Singla.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you for the introduction. We are proud here today to welcome all the experts and dignitaries to another great session of this eTalk series. Something about LPU. LPU has a mammoth, ultra-modern, high-tech, sprawling campus spread over 600 acres. Our Green University campus has more than 40,000 students from all over the world, 3,500 faculty, and more than 2,000 programs. The School of Architecture and Design, one of the oldest schools in the university, we are very proud to say that the NRA of the national rankings, the Government of India has ranked our school number 12th in 2 successive years, 2021 and 2022. The eTalk series today is special as it brings forth numerous learnings from a stalwart in the field of architectural education. We are elated today to have Dr. Vikramaditya Prakash, sir, today in our series. Dr. Vikramaditya Prakash, an illustrious architect, a visionary, an architectural historian, a theorist, is a world-acclaimed personality. His formal academic engagements are as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the College of Built Environment. He previously served as Associate Dean for External Affairs, Chair of Architecture, and Director of Undergraduate Interdisciplinary Programs. His public service includes terms on the boards of Seattle Center and the Seattle AIA. He also directed Chandigarh Urban Lab, a series of interdisciplinary international studios. He received his B.Arch from Chandigarh College of Architecture and his MA and PhD in History of Architecture and Urbanism from Cornell University. He is currently a professor of architecture at the University of Washington, with adjunct appointments in landscape architecture and urban design and planning. He ties the best faculty in the world under his recent endeavor, GAHTC, Global Architecture History Teaching Collective. He is co-design of OUR, Office of Uncertainty Research, a conceptual design research practice dedicated to rethinking architecture in terms of emergent scientific, social, and political parameters of the 21st century. He works on issues of modernism, post-coloniality, global history, fashion. Architecture has translated into elaborately structured works and our beautiful ode to the legacy of his great father, the late Mr. Aditya Prakash. His books include Chandigarh's Le Corbusier, The Struggle for Modernity in Post-Colonial India, A Global History of Architecture with Francis D.K. Ching and Mark Zarzombeck, Colonial Modernities, co-edited with Peter Siver, The Architecture of Shivdat Sharma, Chandigarh, An Architectural Guide, One Continuous Line, Art, Architecture and Urbanism of Aditya Prakash, Rethinking Global Modernism, Architecture, Historiography, and the Post-Colonial. We heartily congratulate him on his recent book, A House Deconstructed. He keeps his love for spontaneous talks on architecture alive with his bi-weekly podcast, The Architecture Talk. As of December 2022, Architecture Talk has received over 220,000 unique downloads and has been independently reviewed in the American Scholar. I feel elated to welcome you, sir. And now I request you to please share your esteemed thoughts with the audience. Welcome, sir.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Singha. Thank you, Rajendra. And thank you, Tara, for inviting me digitally to lovely professional university. On my way from Chandigarh to Delhi many, many times, of course, drive past Jalandhar. No, so I've been past around Jalandhar many times and in the area. So I hope next time I'm in Chandigarh, I will be able to visit you all physically. So I will try. We had a conversation earlier, and there was a question about what to present. And what I'm going to present to you is the story of my career and my interests, rather the interests of my research. And it will be very diverse and quick. So I think I'm going to try and get this going. Stop display. Share screen. I want to share this, I think. So, are you seeing the correct thing? Are you seeing a slide saying interests of my research?
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I've titled this talk, The Interests of My Research, rather my research interests, to talk about what it is that I am interested in the work that I do and present. So, of course, by affiliation, I am professor of architecture. But as Professor Singla said, I also have adjunct appointments in urban design and planning, and in landscape architecture, and most recently, and in some ways most excitingly, in digital arts and experimental media. So this is a diverse range of thoughts and interests, and the question might be, how do they all link together? More specifically, as also in the introduction, in architecture, I'm interested in the history and theory of architecture, which is what most of my training and books are in. And in that, as a kind of a subsect, my specialization is in what is called deconstruction or post-structural theory. This is sort of a continental French late 20th century school of thought, which has to do with trying to find out the limits of language and knowledge and the ways in which the world of knowing and thinking is in some way autonomous to how we actually think we put things together. Out of this comes a special interest of mine, which is called global and post-colonial history, which mostly has to do with trying to retell the history of the world in a manner that is not Eurocentric, and which articulates the special position that places like India have in the world in terms of their post-colonial history. So I'll try and talk about this a little bit more. So that's the history and theory track. But if you go down and see towards the urban design and planning track, of course, as mentioned, I have taken quite a lot of interest in thinking about how my hometown, the city that I was born and brought up in, and that my father helped design with Le Corbusier, Chandigarh, is performing today in the era of globalization. So with respect to that, I ran a series of studios which were briefly mentioned earlier, which looked at Chandigarh at different scales, from furniture to its larger urban planning and master planning. So that takes care of urban planning. But more recently, I have returned to my work in history and theory, and I have taken an interest in what is known as French feminism, which is a way of thinking the world in a different, through different categories of knowledge. And out of that comes a sort of a very, the thing that is kind of obsessing me nowadays, which is interest in fashion. And I will try and show a little bit of work in that, which I think connects my interest in digital arts and experimental media with the kind of theory that I'm interested in. On the other side, on the left-hand side, in global history, the kind of things that I'm doing with are connecting together into what is today called post-humanism, which is the idea which hopefully will become clear that if we are in a climate crisis today, if we are in an environmental crisis today, and if we are looking at sustainable architecture, as Professor Singla was saying earlier, then the problem is not just a technological one, but it is also a human problem in the sense that we have created a world, we have created a way of thinking about things in which places us, the human animal, at the center of things. And we need to sort of rethink that. We have to perhaps give up that perspective and move towards a post-human horizon or a post-anthropocentric horizon. So you can see there are these disparate things, very diverse, that I'm interested in. And if this wasn't diverse enough, I have a very personal and private and unexplained obsession and at a very populist level in quantum mechanics and astrophysics. So if things become really, really complicated, this is an outlier which also interests me, and I don't know quite what to do with it, but it is my fanciful aspiration that one day it will cross through history and theory of architecture, somehow connect to deconstruction, global post-colonial history, and return back to post-humanism. It is somehow I hope that all this will happen. So I don't know, you asked me to create a big map of the many things I do. So map is not a good, it is sort of a diverse field. It's a disconnected field. And I think of myself as a generalist rather than a specialist. I think of myself in the old-fashioned way of what architecture and architectural thinking used to be, which was a philosophy of broad, generalized thinking about how we must be in the world, rather than a specialized aspect of how to perfect a particular rating of a particular building enclosure or envelope. So if I was to put a graphic, my mission is to try and see how these many disparate parts gear together, how they sort of connect together. But even more than that, I try and present the information and knowledge in a different way. So for instance, to give you an example, we can think of knowledge or the things we know as the solar system, and we can say there's a center and there we have 7, 8, or 9 planets, depending on whether you count Pluto or not. But that is actually a little bit of a simplification. If you actually map, for instance, our solar system and all the things that are sort of circulating around the sun at somewhat proportionally, this is what our solar system looks like. And that tells a very different picture. It's not a picture that is so cleared out like this. It becomes a much more complex picture. And in fact, I prefer this graphic, which I'm going to play a little video for you, which will talk about what are the different ways in which old and new ways of doing things. Is the sound from the video coming through? It doesn't matter whether it's not. So this was the old
Yes,
model.
sir, the sound is coming through.
Okay. This is the old model of how we think. So this is not only boring, but also incorrect. But actually, the sun also moves. So you see, this is actually what our solar system is when seen from a larger perspective of our galaxy. So to move on, in a sense, my desire is to move knowledge into a frontier which accepts that this is the way architecture is, which is how the world is. This is how we should be thinking about things. And in terms of the university, since we are at the lovely professional university, I try and see that we have all these disciplines, we have all these fields, but actually knowledge is not in the departments and in the disciplines. Knowledge is this network. And this is something that is extremely important for us to get familiar with, so that when we work as architects, when we work in any other discipline, we realize this. So with that sort of broad introduction, let me talk about some of this more specific things that I'm trying to do to provoke this network way of thinking. I'd like to describe this as a kind of a planetary way of thinking. This is a way that makes us think, always foregrounding the idea that we live on a planet and not on a world or a nation or a culture or a community. We have to switch our thinking in a planetary way. And one of the most thinking about this is what I'm thinking is of course, global history. To that effect, I've written a series of books which were mentioned earlier, and I'm not going to go into all of them. But I'll talk in particular about this book here, which is first of all, the Global History of Architecture. This is a new textbook that my colleague Mark Jarzembek, Frank Ching, and I put together. And we wrote this, when we were really dissatisfied with the textbooks we were using to teaching architectural history. In Chandigarh, when I was taught architectural history, we used this really, really old colonial and in fact, very bad textbook called Bannister Fletcher's History of the Architecture of the World. It's an old colonial history. He basically told a fictional story about how Western civilization came up. And then there were minor and other cultures and histories. Now we have new textbooks and they still have Western history, but they will have one big chapter on Islamic architecture, one big chapter on Hindu architecture and so on. We found this very unsatisfying. So we did a new history in which instead of writing histories about French architecture and English architecture and Indian architecture and Chinese architecture, we instead did history by time cuts. So we took, for instance, 800 AD, and we asked the question, what is the architecture around the world? Then we took 400 BC and we asked, what's the architecture around the world? Similarly, going down the line, 1200, 1400, 1600, 1800, up to the modern times. By doing this, we focus more on the planet, on the global, rather than producing individual histories. One of the consequences of this is that it tells other narratives, other ways of telling histories, rather than national histories. This is a famous American painting, which tells, for instance, the liberty leading the people, actually French painting, and in the Indian context, I don't know what would be the equivalent of, the Indian national history. But rather you tell history which is disparate and small pieces and aggregated into a kaleidoscope of information and knowledge, rather than a specific kind of singular narrative that verifies one particular story of what, for instance, the nation of India is about, which is a big contention. For instance, in India, we are fighting hard about what is Indian history, as we know in the political scenario. And we try and displace this and tell not sort of glorious histories, but histories in a different manner. And when you tell histories in a planetary way, it opens up new ways of thinking about it. So again, the American context, I'm sorry, I don't have good Indian examples right now. There is, for instance, we see these two what are known as pit dwellings, houses made out of simple shelters, ancient, which would have some kind of a pit in the middle of them. And this is Jamon culture, 6th century Japan, and this is Navajo culture in central United States. And they both have a similar section and form going through them. And you think, well, they're really far apart. They can't really have any connection. But actually they do. When the last ice age ended and waters became warm and forests came into being, and with that rivers flowed, there was a culture around the salmon river, about the salmon fish, which connected this whole area. And you find that actually that's the reason behind why these dwellings are similar. And in fact, when you look at the map differently, it is very easy to see how East Asia is so closely connected to the Western North America. That is, in fact, an ancient and close connection, which is, of course, undone by the colonial history, which tells history centered on England and London and GMT, and which we have to undo. This results in many new things. It results in different ways of seeing architecture and different ways of telling narratives, and emphasizes, for instance, movement and migration instead of particular national histories. It emphasizes the constantly changing boundaries and moving constitutions of cultures. It does not insist on fixity, and it enables us to ask questions that may not be possible, as for instance, and opens us up to knowledges which are not generally credited in a modernist way of looking at things. And I'm not going to get it. This fantastic example of this amazing temple in Sri Lanka on the Buddha's ear, but in a longer lecture, I could have gone into it. But in particular, in all of this, of course, I'm interested in rethinking modern architecture, modernism, which is a critical thing in time. And and I try and tell the history of modern architecture in a different way, because when we say modern architecture is about science, technology, rationalization, standardization, optimization, and all these things that modern architecture is supposed to be about, we also remember that science is responsible for the carnage of the nuclear bomb, and rationalization, standardization is also responsible, for instance, in the West during World War II for the Holocaust, which is the Jewish Holocaust in Germany. This is, of course, the picture of the entrance to Auschwitz and all the train that went into this concentration camp, where upwards of several million Jews were very standardized. So modern architecture and modern rational thinking can be both equally disastrous as it can be useful. And so how do we rethink modernist ways of doing? So, for instance, and that, in a sense, is the project that I have been involved in retelling the history of modern architecture. Part of that, for instance, is my writing of this book on my father, the One Continuous Line, the Art, Architecture, and Urbanism of Aditya Prakash, in which one continuous line is a reference both to his interest in the continuous line, as for instance, this one of his well-known doodles with this graphic going through in one straightforward line, but it also is a reference to the work that he did across art, architecture, planning, theater, philosophy, academics, poetry, and so on. And I'm trying to ask, what is the line that connects these disparate disciplines? So in that sense, I'm very much a son of my father, where he is trying to connect across the disciplines. In many ways, I am also trying to connect across the disciplines. And one of the contentions that I have made, for instance, here is the Chandigarh team, here is Le Corbusier, here's Pierre Jeanneret, here are all the Indian architects, and here is my father. What is the way in which this entire team built Chandigarh? And the graphic and the contention that I do is that indeed it is the dialogue, it is the movement of conversation across nations, across people, across architects, across planners. It is the in-between of all their conversations that produces a place like Chandigarh. It is not a work that is singularly authored by one genius and then regionalized and localized and transformed by his disciples and acolytes. And we have to see this as a discursive production. And this kind of thinking is what is called, deconstructive or post-colonial perspective on the world. So it is in the interests of thinking and conversation and furthering ways of looking at things that I initiated this podcast called Architecture Talk. I hope everybody in the audience who listens to podcasts will subscribe to it and give it 5 stars, even if you listen to it or not, because I need the numbers, even though I have a good number. And in this, I invite anybody. Of course, I invite a lot of architects and architectural academics and people from allied disciplines such as landscape architecture, urban design and planning, and so on. But I also invite filmmakers, fashion designers, artists, curators, physicists, physicians, brain surgeons, and anybody else, and photographers, for instance, to talk about how they see what it is to inhabit the world. I see architecture as the job of inhabiting the world, and that is the conversation that I have with everyone, because everybody inhabits the world in different ways, and we all share the world. It is as a part of my interest on how we inhabit the world that I became interested in the work of this man called Alexander McQueen, who is a British late 20th century punk fashion designer. And he had an absolutely iconoclastic and kind of revolutionary way of thinking about fashion. And the provocations that he put forth for me open up a door, open up a perspective, and most excitingly, offer a vision of the ways in which we can inhabit the world in a post-human, in a non-anthropocentric and a non-human animal-centered manner, and which is one of the reasons why I follow him and try and apply the lessons of his work into architecture. And if you want to see the work that I've overdone on this topic, you can go to this website called Fashion-Architecture, and it will tell you something about what we have done. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on McQueen, but it's a wide world, which is quite interesting, and also has, like, for instance, this is the series they did after his visit to India, which I have quite a lot of interest in. But moving on, I want to finally, in the last 10 minutes or so, focus. How am I for time? I've been talking 21 minutes, so 4 or 5 minutes or more. I want to focus.
Please take as much time as you want.
Yes, we would love to hear from you, sir. We have no.
We'll keep to the schedule. I know it's late in India, but I have a bunch of more things to show to you. So I want to introduce you to the conceptual work that we are doing in the Office of Uncertainty Research, which is my most recent endeavor, and which is dedicated to many things. But it is, first of all, talking about the question of imagination in the biggest challenge of our time, which is, of course, the climate and the environmental crisis, where the issue is that we are destroying the planet because of not just bad use of fossil fuels, but also because of a huge capitalist consumer culture. All right, this system of infinite consumption and infinite waste. This is also something I learned from my father. It is fundamentally a problem. We cannot keep consuming and wasting. This is going to just kill us all. And so therefore, we need another way of being in the world. In other words, we've got to produce a new imagination of being in the world, which is something I'm deeply interested in. I love this quotation by the Bangalore and Philadelphia-based architect and landscape architect Dilip Dakuna and his late wife Anuradha Mathur, in which he said imagination must come before critique. We need a brand new imagination, and it is a dedication to that that my colleague Mark Jarzobek and I, and you can see our work at the website called the Office of Uncertainty Research. So to give you a sense of the projects that we are doing, this is the project that we did, in which we took a house recently built in Seattle, only about 1,200 square feet, addition to, this is actually my house here in Seattle. And we built it very modernist, very lean, clean, and very locally sourced as far as possible. But even though we did it in that particular way, it turned out that its materials were sourced from around. So we took that house and we saw where did everything come from. It turns out its materials were sourced from around the world, at least legally. We saw that the labors that went into making it, here is only the last part of the construction. And actually, there is a huge, big and complex infrastructure of human labor globally that goes into the making of any house. When you look at steel, for instance, where it comes from, when you look at the materials. And then we saw the materials that go into it. And although it has a very clean modernist sense, as if it was made simply out of 2 or 3 materials, it's just steel, glass, and maybe a drywall, but it actually has a vast amount of materials that go into it. Even steel, even though it's 99, 80, 98% iron, has a huge amount of aggregates that go into it. So we tracked those. And finally, we asked the question of how old actually everything is. So for instance, in the red area, wood is, for instance, which we use extensively here in the United States, maybe only 40, hopefully is no more than 30, 40 years old. but maybe at maximum 80, 90 years old. We don't use old hardwoods, of course, anywhere anymore. It can be only 40 to 80 years old. But actually, if you look at the metal, every metal, all the metal on Earth is actually more than the life of the Earth. It is actually about 5 billion, not million, 5 billion years old. All the heavy metal on planet Earth was made in huge supernova explosions, which took place 5 billion years ago, at least. So it is something to think about, that when you hold an iPhone or when you hold an I-beam in your hand or touch it, you are looking at heavy metals that were made 5 billion years ago. And water is actually even older than that. It is important to realize that we are part of a vast galaxy and vast planetary and universe system, which impacts our life in very significant ways. That's all we said over here, and this was actually exhibited in the Venice Biennale 2 years ago. And there's a very nice film and everything about this, which you can all see on our website. Another project that we are interested in was called the Tirtha Recomposting Temple Complex. Here in Seattle, it is now possible to compost human dead bodies. Like, you can take a human dead body, and instead of cremating it or burying it, you can compost it like we compost old vegetables. So we thought that's a great idea. Composting human bodies is very sustainable. But we can't just use the old systems and use our old Vedic mantras or the Christian systems or the Islamic systems, because they are based on a very different way of thinking. They're based on an ancient epistemology, which is outdated. We need a contemporary one. So we designed a new 21st century composting temple. And we not only did we design the temple, we designed the rituals that would go with it. We did a film and video about it. We designed music about it. And all with the idea that architecture must work as a cross-disciplinary way of culture making, of place making, of identity making. And of course, we drew both from Greek references, we drew from American references, and of course, Sanskritic references, as you can tell from the title of Tirtha. This also is available on the website. This was exhibited at the European Cultural Center ECCC exhibit in Venice, which was a lot of fun. Part of it was we designed a new way of representing architecture, which we called an architectural opera, which I don't know if I can play. Let me see if I can play maybe a minute of. So this goes on. It's a 37-minute video, again available on the website, where what we are saying is, what is architectural representation? Okay, we have a fly-throughs, we have axonometrics, we have perspectives, we have these traditional forms of representation. But what if we could reinvent the forms of architectural representation using new forms of animation and video to tell narratives which open other possibilities of being in the world, which are not focused on the perspective and the human eye. So you can see these over there. And of course, they're multicultural. For instance, if you go through the videos, there are some in which I have Bollywood references. I have old Jodhpur paintings right next to Flemish paintings from Europe and contemporary visual arts. We are now slowly trying to work in Japanese anime. but that's something, much too complicated. So finally, I want to show you this new project that we are working on. It's called Kishkindha, New York, which is a project. I don't know if you know the story of Kishkindha. Okay, Professor Singla does, Kishkindha, and I didn't know much about Kishkindha. And there was a Poche the studio during COVID, during Corona, in which there is this person called Ashya Satar, who has done a new translation of the Ramayana, of Valmiki's Ramayana, not Tulsidas Ramayana. And she was presenting a lecture on the cities in the Ramayana. And of course, she was talking about Ayodhya and she was talking about Lanka. And in the course of the conversation, she said to me, Vikram, there is a third city in the Ramayana, and then not only Lanka and Ayodhya. It's called Kishkindha. Kishkindha kaun si hui? So I had some vague memory. My mom used to tell me about Kishkindha. She said Kishkindha is the city in the forest. It is where the
Bali and Sugriv.
where Bali and Sugriv used to live. I said, so it's a city in the forest. She said, well, it's not a city in the forest. This is the important part. Okay. She said, it's not a city in the forest. It's not matlab traditional city where you clear out the forest and build a city. She said, it's the forest as a city. And that was a mind-blowing concept for me. Like a forest as a city rather than a city in the forest, because traditionally a city clears out the forest. We build a wall, we build a moat, and then we make the city, and then we plant a few trees to make it green. So we thought this was a fantastic idea that if we are to imagine the possibility of a post-human future, then we will have to learn to live interactively with animals, with trees, with the forest systems, with forest ecologies, and we will have to learn to live with non-human intelligences. We'll have to learn with the intelligence, for instance, of octopuses. We'll have to learn to live the intelligence of the Vanarsena. We'll have to learn to live with the intelligence of, we talk very much in the West about fungus. Fungus is a superb, fantastic intelligence, which is not. So we created a idea that what happens if Manhattan, which is the most city of cities, were to transform into a forest city, and we call it Kishkindha, New York. And we imagine this beastie, which is part human, which is part fungus, which is part octopus, which goes in and transforms the entire city. And we have done a series of animations around it, and a series of videos which talk about how the city might change. So I'll show you some of these things as we go. Here, for instance, this is earlier I showed you an elevation view. This is a plan view, which talks about how this sort of entity might show up in the middle of Times Square. It might produce a plan which we don't know what it will be, because it is an artificial intelligence. It's an artificial intelligence in the sense that it is transhuman. It involves intelligence of animals. It involves intelligence of the environment, biomes. It's a kind of biophilia. Professor Singla is interested in biophilia. This is a different kind of biophilia. And how that, because we are trying to talk about things that we don't really know about. But it might create new cities, which, if this animation runs, yes, I will allow maybe 1 minute of this to run, and you'll get a sense of how we produce this video about how a landscape might slowly transform into something else. So have a look at this. There you go. So the old place becomes something new, something very different. Like I said, it is a question about producing new imaginations, producing a new understanding of what architecture is. Of course, this is in some way inspired by things like archigram and metabolism, which are sort of old 60s ways of thinking. And this actually is about to be exhibited also in Venice at the European Cultural Center exhibition. So I will be in Venice from 11th to 17th of June. We are going to have an event over there. In case you are planning to visit the Biennale, please come in June. It will be a good thing to visit. And over there, what we are doing is we are taking, you probably know this famous painting. It's called The Garden of Earthly Delights. And we are transforming it into a Bosch's painting into our triptych, which looks like this. So, it's like this, and we are changing it into this. And this is actually inspired. What we have done is we have taken the door of the assembly in Chandigarh. We have overlaid it with a migration map by an amazing artist called Julie Mehrutu, who's an indigenous artist working in the United States. We overlaid them, we produced new graphics, we've added our Beastie and Kishkinda onto it. We mixed and merged it, which is how we finally result in what we have here, which is this. So it is going to be made to this dimensions, and to show basically it's a narrow space that we have. On the wall over here, in plan, you can see that this triptych will be shown. Then opposite that will be one of these Corbusier chaises, which you can see over here in elevation, from above which Oculus will hang, which will give you a 3D view of the video. And it will be put up like this. I invite you to come to Venice to see this. And it will be an amazing interactive event of various types. And finally, the last thing I want to show you is this project that we have recently completed. It's called a cenotaph for Niels Bohr. If you have run your modern architectural history, you will remember that Etienne Boulet, the French architect, did a very famous cenotaph for Newton, called the Cenotaph for Newton in 1880, which talked about the arrival of the classical age. Then Lebbeus Woods did a cenotaph for Albert Einstein. So we moved from the Newtonian world, which is the classical world, into the Einsteinian world, which is the relative world. And we have designed a cenotaph for Niels Bohr, which moves us into the quantum world. What this has over here is entangled particles. If you follow, particles which have a relationship until discovered, until you see and open them, which therefore produces the possibility of communication at faster than the speed of light, which Einstein called spooky action at a distance. But it heralds a new world. We are making basically the claim that the quantum age is dawning, and we need to get ready for it. And perhaps you are aware of this around all the sort of conversation around artificial intelligence, which is, with ChatGPT and so on, which is just, everybody is going really crazy about it. So overall, though, in the end, what we are about is conversations. We are very interested in creating what we call Stimmen conversations. It's a German word which talks about who your friends are, who are the people you are in conversation. They can be dead or alive. They can be intellectual, or they can be your best friends. They can be your lovers, or they can be people you are arguing and dialoguing with. And in many ways, we argue that architecture is about producing these affinities and conversations across frontiers. And it is with that idea in mind, I thank you for inviting me to make a presentation about some of the work that I've done. And I hope we can further this conversation in many different ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I would like to say that all the delegates here would agree that it has been a utopian experience. It is not just touched upon, one aspect that, I mean, I was just hoping for a surface introduction to all the things that you do, but it has been truly insightful. It has been a commendable journey this past half hour that we have spent, and we would actually love to spend more time. And, it doesn't do justice to the work now that I see.
Tara, I'm
So,
going to interject because I can't stop myself. So it was such a wonderful presentation, and I think you've opened the mind to so many new possibilities of looking at the world, not only the old world, the historical world, the past, but also the future. And it's amazing to have a glimpse of what you're doing, how you're doing it. That's a mystery. I would love to see and work with you and, see how you are connecting these diverse fields, how you're managing to connect these. Is it an organic process, or is it something which is happening how you're going about it? That's another story. I think we need many visits from you, sir, not only online, but in the campus, definitely, because this discussion has to continue.
Yes.
Two things which I want to stress is, number one, the way you're looking at history. We are definitely going to introduce this in our curriculum. Our students need to look at history this way. And, I was thinking about India, the way you are thinking about the world. I was thinking about India, and I was wondering, I was looking at the history of Jalandhar. We are in Jalandhar. And there are so many things. It's one of the oldest cities in North India. It was Trigat in Mahabharat. And Alexander came a few kilometers away and turned back from Jalandhar. And there's so much rich history. And the way you are looking at history, that's the way we need to look at Indian history. And that's the way the children need to look at Indian history. It's amazing. And I'm definitely going to talk to our teachers, and we're going to reintroduce that. You made me so proud of India today. Again, I'm always proud of India, but today you've taken it to a new level. Thank you so much. It was wonderful having you. And I hope, like you said, we'll continue this.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your comments. And in terms of, process, how does one link all these things together? Yeah. I tell my students, you do things by swimming in the river of creativity. Creativity doesn't come from the back of your head. Creativity comes from jumping into the waters and then, enjoying the Bhati Ganga of things, so you just jump into things, and then you find quantum physics connects to fashion, and it's very interesting.
Wonderful.
Our chat box is already overflowing with a lot of questions, but to this Behti Ganga and the creativity and the flow of it, if I'm not wrong, there was this quote, a poem by the late Mr. Aditya Prakash, in which he says that, everything can come to you easily, but not creativity. Creativity, you have to fight and get that instinct in you. So I think looking at architecture in a more planetary way makes architecture not a generalist knowledge, but I would actually calibrate it as a specialized field again, and you as the perfectionist in it, that it's not hard to, get through a design, but it's harder to make it a creative solution to a problem. And you have introduced a lot of facets today. And before I open this session for the Q&A by our delegates, I have a very simple question to ask you, which is going to be on the same lines what Atul sir said. Is there an objective, time-bound, disciplined schedule that you follow that, every day I have to do all these things? I really want to know, how are you doing so much? I really want to know.
No, I don't have I'm not disciplined at all. I do everything simultaneously. So, you know,
Do you multitask a lot?
no, I don't multitask. I monotask, but I monotask serially. I do one thing and then I get a little bored with it, or it doesn't, it gets frustrating. Then I move on to the next, then I move on to the next, then I come back to this one, then I move. You know, there is a great lecture done by the famous Catalonian architect Enric Miralles at the AA. You know, he did this at the AA. If you look it up on YouTube, I think he did it around 1990 or 1990. And he was describing his process of working. And it's a brilliant lecture. And he says the way he works is, which inspired me. He said, I'm working on something and that idea is not going anywhere. So I put it aside and then I start solving some problem in a project. Then I remember that I did something 6 months ago and that thing works very well in this project. So I put it into this project. And then meanwhile, I keep moving, the next project comes. And then in that project, I realized that something that I was working on the previous project can quit. So he says, you know, you are just doing things. And then some things from various things fit to a certain solution, and you just apply them. If form doesn't follow function, I'm sorry to say. And these sort of old ideograms about asking the right question, and then there's only a single line that goes from a particular problem to a particular solution, is a beautiful but fanciful modernist myth. In fact, creativity is a Bhati Ganga. You know, and I don't know what my father meant when he was talking to you about it, but maybe I've imbibed from it. You know, you have to learn to be receptive. Creativity is developing antennas, growing antlers in your head, and opening up the signals to everything to come in. If you allow everything to come in, things will flow out automatically. This is my view on things.
Absolutely. Kudos to that. And with that, I think I better take all these questions that are rolling in our chat box. Our first question is that as you discussed about the city in a forest, how do you approach designing buildings in different contexts, such as urban versus rural? And how do you ensure that your designs respond to the specific needs of a given context?
So they have to see. So my effort would be to undo the differentiation between the urban and the rural. So one concept I talk about is called deruralization, which is the idea that we must always remember that when we define the city as the non-urban, as the non-rural, then we are doing a certain kind of a violence to the rural. So which is to say, you should not only design to the context, you should also critique and transform the context, so that if you are being asked to produce a project for a singular context as the urban and the rural, try and see what are the connections between those contexts and undo the long history by which these two have been separated. So designing a forest city, for instance, Kishkinda is precisely our attempt to produce at least an imagination about what life might be in the future. So this division between urban and rural, legalized and perpetuated through concepts of property, is something that in the longer run has proved to be extremely dangerous and harmful. And at least at a conceptual level, you have to work to undo in many ways. So the idea of context and locality and people and community, for me, has to be cross-examined by the idea of what I call the planetary. I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you so much. Our next question, I think, has come from a faculty member. It says that as an educator in architecture, what do you see as the biggest motivations in the profession today? And how do you think architecture students mold through these?
Well, when I was going to School of Architecture in Chandigarh, our religion was called modern architecture. By the time I finished School of Architecture and went to grad school, the new religion used to be called postmodern architecture. All right. This whole business of making historically situated architectures, Michael Graves, Robert Venturi in India, even people like Charles Correa Doshi, vagara, vagara, everyone turned postmodern. Through the 90s and 2000s, in the early days, we didn't have any religion in architecture. Now, of course, unquestionably, I think, I'm sure in Lovely Professional, as in Seattle, as at the AA, the number one ruling religion is called, there are two religions, but the number one ruling religion is called sustainability. I can't imagine anybody seriously practicing or teaching a studio without in some way or the other invoking sustainability. And I think that this is very important. There is no question that we as architects and urbanists and planners are fundamentally responsible for, along with energy and of course, a lot of other people, for the environmental crisis that we are facing. And this is a very serious thing. And I'm glad that this is a central thing in all of our studios and in the cultures. And I hope you are all teaching it. But the message that I'm trying to bring is that technology is not the only solution, and technology will not be enough of a solution. We cannot technologize our way out of this problem. We need a reimagination of what architecture is. We need a reimagination of what it is to live on planet Earth, along with, of course, technology, which is critical.
Very well said, sir. Very well said. We have another question. I think it is based on the collaborations that you have online and internationally. How can architecture be used as a tool to address systemic inequality and promote social change across all nations?
Yeah, that's too much to ask of architecture. Architecture cannot do that. This is a much larger question and has to do with politics and economics and policy. And indeed, global capitalism. I think global capitalism is the fundamental thing. And this is a question that has to be addressed. We can make the best contributions we can at tables which are staffed by people who determine economic and political policy. So I'm afraid that's what I think about that.
Right. Our next question is on your cross-cultural relationships. So they say that you've been involved in a number of international collaborations and projects. How do you approach the cross-cultural communication and collaboration in your work? And what do you advise? What advice do you have for architects working across borders? How should they be going about it?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. That is actually a very good question. It is both challenging and amazing. Working across cultures, just now we are working, for instance, with a dance group in Venice, who basically only speak Italian, and I don't speak a word of Italian, although my wife is Italian American. दो चार गाली निकाल लेता हूँ बस Italian में और कुछ नहीं. So it is not only a cultural and language issue, it is also a way of thinking issue, how people put together their values and how they imagine things as being significant and insignificant. And communicating across all these things can be a very significant challenge, because you come to the project with a certain expectation. What I try and tell myself, what we try and tell ourselves, is to remain open. What I put in one of the slides, is being open to the other, open to the ear of the other, and be happy and be prepared for the unexpected and embrace the accidental. Embracing the accidental is the technique to go to collaborate across cultures and disciplines. Because if you look for perfect solutions, if you look for total consensus, band baj jayega, or you will end up with extreme mediocrity. So it is better to embrace the accidental, give up on things that are not really working, keep some ideas in your pocket for the next project, and try and see what happens, like jazz music or like a rag singing, bhav mood mein jo chal raha hai usse kuch nikalta hai, prabhavit hota hai, so very good. Drop things that work and accept things that don't work.
So our next question is that do you think that the Indian architectural education system fails to educate students of architecture socially? And I would like to add culturally also to it. Are there any more additives that should be made a part of the education system to, introduce that empathy in students so that they can be better professionals?
I don't really know too much about the Indian architectural system anymore, because when I was there, we used to have like 20 schools of architecture. Up to 450 school of architecture hai. So to be honest, I don't really know what's going on. But I will say one thing, I am extremely disappointed and sad that there is still no significant history of architecture, masters and PhD in the country. We have historic preservation, we have conservation, we have urban design and planning, we have sustainability and so on and so forth. But there is no still advanced degrees in history of architecture. So, kuch karo iska.
So we will definitely, with your support, LP is very, very supportive, and we need your support to start this. I think this is a very great endeavor and very close to my heart as well. And I'll definitely take this up with you.
Wonderful.
Sir, we have, I think, 2-3 more questions coming in.
Okay.
Meanwhile, I'll just ask you, a genius like you, you must draw inspiration from your father. I'm sure that there have been multiple instances in which, you have drawn inspiration from him. Would you mind sharing a few quotes from the late Mr. Prakash that helped shape who you are today?
I'll try to come up with quotes, but when I moved to the United States and as a young man, I think perhaps like a lot of young men and young women in different ways, I wanted to be as far away, not as far away. I wanted to define myself and be different from my father. So I set myself on a different trajectory. But the older I've got, the more I recognize my father in me. And it's like a slap from the back. You stand one day in front of the mirror and piche se thappad padta hai, you're like your dad. And now I have learned to embrace that and be happy with it. I think today in today's lecture, today's presentation, this presentation I've done many times. Today in the presentation, I suddenly realized halfway through the presentation that that the multifaceted, multidisciplinary person that I described my father to be is exactly the description I started my lecture with. I just realized that in today's lecture while talking. And so I said that, oh my God, just like my father, I'm doing the same thing. So I'm unquestionably my father's son. And happily so. So there are so many quotes. I feel, see, the way I look at it is, it's another version of the Bhati Ganga. You see, who is my father? My father, if I wrote the book on my father. He himself is product of his times, and his father and his mother. Well, he didn't know his mother; she died very young. But we all are quotations of those, our stimmen, are those, our friends, our interlocutors who come before, who are around us. And this is not something to be ashamed of. This idea of originality, ke mujhe apna kuch karna hai, is a profound and misguided myth. Originality and repetition is a false opposition. Those two are not opposing ideas. They are the same idea. So if you can grasp that, then I am simply my father's quotation in an original way.
But I'll still push it forward, and I would say that, there are learnings. There are, little sayings from our parents the time we are growing up. And if I'm not wrong, we tend to remember that one thing that he specifically asked us to do, not to do, in a generic format of life. So we have many students here, and I think this would be a very good point to address right now, that somehow our parents leave their words as a legacy to us, and that legacy carves us into what we are. So
I will leave you the quote that comes to my head, that my father wrote about and spoke about always, which is, he said, life is always right. Life is always right. So try and interpret that.
And sir, life never retired.
Life
yes.
Yes, that was his famous play, end of his life. Yeah, and he lived that life to the very end. Yes. Wonderful play. It's available on YouTube.
Life is always right. Yes, that's so true. And it's very meaningful and very pertinent, especially in times of today when we fight, negativity and so many things going around.
Yes.
I think if we can live with that quote and accept whatever comes our way and take out a creative solution, very well said, sir. Very well said. I'm just going to have a look if we have any other questions. Rajendra, meanwhile. Yes, sir.
In the Q&A, there are 8 questions. You want to go to those? If you press Q&A.
Yes, sir.
What practices do we adopt to bridge architecture education and profession in India? You see that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Actually, I'm getting questions on 3 different levels. So I was just trying to keep up with one and then jump to the other. Definitely. We are taking a question from Ritu Parna now. What are the biggest challenges as an architect you faced?
Believability. There's a division between practicing architects and academic architects. And I'm an academic architect. So practicing architects rightfully, work with the idea, well, all this is good, but, how do we build it? And we sort of disparage practicing architects as saying, you're just doing nuts and bolts. What is the imagination? That's a big problem. And that's the difference between architectural education and the profession. And I think that a healthy dialogue, a healthy critique in both directions is a good thing, rather than one being subservient to the other.
The other question that we have is from Isha Kumar. She says that nowadays destroying forest or green fields and constructing a building on it it is considered sustainable by young architecture students. What's your view on it? As in, if you fill in sustainable materials on any virgin site and you build a new building, so even that is considered sustainable. So what's your take on that? That yeah, if they're using a green roof or a roof garden in that building, and is that considered sustainable?
I think there is this whole market about sustainability, which is, done by this entire, rating system and lead system and Griha system and this thing and that thing. And that is designed I mean, it does good work in the sense that it promotes, discourages using of clearly toxic and other kind of materials. Right? I think that that's a good thing. But I think in many ways it has become a alibi for not really thinking about the impacts of the work that we do. So, you can clear cut a forest and destroy the ecology of a land and then put a green building on it, which has got Griha certification. And I think that's a problem. And I'm not trying to be just simply negative and say, okay, all this is bekar. And it's, of course, much better than the way we used to build. But I think we need to go much beyond that kind of a thinking.
So when you say that imagination must come before critique, what is your take on students taking inspiration from Pinterest, YouTube, Facebook, and other social media tools, and even artificial intelligence to some extent?
Take inspiration from anything, but be inspired. Don't just cut paste.
Absolutely.
So I'd like, for instance, AI, Chat GPT, DALI, vagara. Now I should see this in my studios all the time. And I said, this is fine, use whatever you want, but this is no different from any image you find on the internet for me. If you made it on Chat GPT or DALI, it's fine. But it is still just an image you found on the internet. No, what are you saying? What are you, how are you collaging this? What does it, how does this inspire you? Convince me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what lies beyond that inspiration is where creativity sprouts from. So definitely, yes.
Right. Are you really inspired? Or are you just saying कि इसने chat GPT ने मेरा काम कर दिया? If you're saying chat GPT did my work, then all you're saying to me is you're irrelevant. And that tomorrow chat GPT will do your work and nobody is going to hire you. But if you're using chat GPT and DALI or whatever the software you're using, and you're adding value to it, then you are somebody. Otherwise, you're simply, cutting the branch that you are sitting on.
So Chandigarh has been your hometown. You've grown up in Chandigarh. You have also multiple endeavors that have made you evaluate the urban scenario of Chandigarh. Chandigarh was designed as a model city in planning, but the way it is headed today, do you think that the planned city is less walkable, and why? What is making it so?
Chandigarh is totally walkable. No, I don't know I'm not sure what the question is. Chandigarh
Currently is exploding with vehicles. It has the largest number of privately owned vehicles. And with the road width increasing day by day, do you feel that Chandigarh is a planned city and still it's less walkable? What are the main reasons for it being less walkable?
Chandigarh is still walkable in spite of the massive explosion of vehicles. When Chandigarh was made in the 50s, you read the old literature on it, everybody used to critique huge big roads, and in Chandigarh there are no cars. Why the hell are they making all these roads? And Corbusier used to say this is a pedestrian city, and everybody criticized him for it. Now that we have 6 cars per family, you can still walk from sector to sector to sector in Chandigarh in spite of this, because of the circulation system, which regulates the cars to the big Vs, the big, Janpat Vagara. So, and that is why, Chandigarh is still the #1 city in North India, and all the Punjabis want to have a house in Chandigarh. And Jalandhar, I think.
True.
So I see Chandigarh as an exceptional success, which is not to say it's a model city, but it is compared to every other city. I spent a whole day in Ludhiana this time. It's just become impossible to do anything in Ludhiana now. Compared to what is going on in other small and mid-sized towns in across North India in particular, which I know a little bit about. I don't know so much about. Chandigarh is still holding up beautifully.
I'm going to take the last question for today's session, and I really apologize to all the others whose questions I've not been able to take today. We would be looking forward to many more sessions with Sir, and you can have detailed discussions on all the books as well. So this last question is from Asna Arora. Looking ahead to the future of architecture, what emerging technologies or trends do you think will have the biggest impact on the profession? And how can architects prepare for this change?
AI, no questions about it. AI is going to transform everything. So if you thought digital technology was big, you ain't seen nothing yet, as we say here in America. Get ready, put on your seatbelts, and wait for AI. Band bajne wala hai.
Very true. Very true. Right, sir. It has been a very beautiful session. And before I close the session, I'd like to request Architect Rajendra Kumar, my colleague, to present a vote of thanks.
Before Rajendra, I put a couple of websites in the chat for you all. If you can share that with the larger group.
Surely, sir.
Sure. Ashna, please, cut and paste this website which Vikram sir has just written in the chat box and put it on the WhatsApp group, and I will also forward it to other schools in other part of India.
Yes, sir.
So Tara, yeah, thank you so much. I knew that I didn't, post my question in the chat box because I know that my turn will not come. But I have a one personal question to Vikram sir before I finally propose vote of thought. But before that, sir, do you still play cricket? Because I saw a cricket ball in your hand. Do you still play? So,
I'm anxious to get off this call so that I can find out IPL mein ho kya raha hai.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I know your son name is Renzo, so I think now I know the reason why his name is Renzo, because of ma'am being Italian, and I think, sir, I am also gonna be in Venice Biennale during your time, so I hope I will be seeing you. Okay. Sir, I have this book by Mr. Vikramaditya Prakash, and I was seeing also the date which he made a very beautiful peacock painting, and it is 2002, so which is 21 years old. This is a very precious book with me. So now my question, sir, I would like to know some of your experiences as a young Vikramaditya Prakash, because I attended one of lecture during my study in Milan, and I attended the talk of William Curtis. And he used to talk about young Vikramaditya Prakash as a very active, and if I may use the word architect activist. So do you think that this activism in architecture is also very important in today's time, and with your personal experiences also, sir? And then I will put the vote of thanks.
Absolutely, absolutely. But activism in the non-NGO sense. Not just in the NGO sense, working with disadvantaged communities, but sort of intellectual activism in the academic place is an extremely important piece. Academics need to not just be carriers of professional knowledge and truth, as if we don't know the truth, but a kind of activist in terms of producing and cultivating a reimagination of the discipline and the possibilities of architecture. This is very urgent because we are at sea. We don't believe in old modernist philosophies. We have surrendered all our thinking to the technology of sustainability. We need a reimagination, an activist reimagination in the academic place.
Thank you so much, sir. And we have learned a lot of new things in today's. I mean, I especially personally liked that this Kishkinda project, and I think, Dr. Atul, we need to do something, this collaborative studios or some kind of a proposal in future with this, sir. And
Just waiting for sir to come to India and come to LPU very soon. I'm just looking forward to it.
And sir, you have also introduced many new words about deruralizations and all. And it remembers me one of my talk in Netherlands, and there was a discussion about practitioner and academician. So one word which was introduced, pracademics. So I think you are very, very nicely making a balance of practice and academics, and so you are truly pracademic, sir. So now I have, formally, I would like to close this session. Thanks a lot to Tara and Atul for such a wonderful moderation. I'm sure that all audience and more particularly all students have benefited a lot by knowledge sharing of our eminent speaker, Dr. Vikram Prakash. I would like to express our sincere thanks to our speaker, Dr. Vikram sir, for sparing your valuable time. We can understand your busy schedule now. I know that you have to watch IPL also. So still you took out time. Thank you so much, sir. I thank our Dean, Dr. Atul Singla, and senior management of LPU. Thanks to you all for your support. I thank IT team of LPU. I would like to also express thanks to my colleague, architect Ashna Arora. She has always, 24 hours available for any help. I'm sorry if I'm not able to take all the names of all the faculty.
You have to thank yourself for coordinating this wonderful event.
Thank you so much, Dr. Atul. Last but not the least, all the students and faculty who are still present. We are exceeding a lot of time, and everybody is at dinner time. And many of the students, they also, I am sure that their mess time is also closed, and they will miss dinner today. But it was such a beautiful lecture, so that's why everybody is still engaged here. So thank you so much to all, and thank you so much, Vikram sir. We would be looking forward to see you sometime soon, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, sir. We are elated. Great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.